Okay, so this is part one of my MIP SP-2 four-wheel drive conversion project for the RC10. Most recently, I just finished my MIP 410 Legend four-wheel drive conversion for the RC10, and I figured I would get started on this, even though I still have to paint the body and put a few finishing touches on the 410 Legend. It'd be a good time to get started on this guy. So I had a few thoughts that I wanted to go over before I really get into, taking everything apart, cleaning it, and rebuilding it. So one thing, as you can see, is that I have for the SP2 both the belt drive option and the chain drive option. So I already did a belt drive conversion for the 410 Legend project. So what I'd like to do for this project is to take the belt drive out and use the chain drive. The chain drive is much more rare anyway, so I figured it would be nice to do a build on that. And I do have the parts for this. It's not just the chain, but there are also some extra sprockets that you use specifically for the chain drive in here. And so you just take out this little pulley here and you mount those sprockets on and you're good to go. So a few things to point out about the SP2 kit. So this SP2 was released by MIP before the 410 Legend was released. And so there were a few things that they had you do to the chassis which were obviated with the 410 Legend. So let's see, actually I will go to this right here. So one of the things that they did is with the SP2 it was assumed that you would keep the stock steering rack, which has a specific arm length extending out from where you mount the steering rack onto the little screws that go through the chassis. And because it kept that stock length, and because you're putting a gearbox on the front nose, you're reducing how much space you have left just for clearance for everything. So what they had you do was to actually drill some holes that pull the steering rack back and spread it out a little bit so that when you mount the gearbox, the steering rack can clear the gearbox. But now that you're pulling the steering rack back, you now have to cut these sort of V-shaped openings in the chassis so that when the steering rack actually swings from side to side, it clears the chassis. And I would like to use this guy right here. This is a like a hot orange colored chassis, powder coated for the RC10. I think this would be pretty cool to use with the chain drive conversion, and I'd like to find, and use other parts that have nice matching colors to this. But because that chassis is pretty uncommon, I don't want to have to hack it to bits to get this cut in place and to drill these holes. The only holes I really anticipate drilling are these two right here, which you use to mount the tensioner that goes on the chassis. But other than that, I don't want to have to drill any other holes. So what I'm thinking of at least trying is to use the steering rack from the 410 Legend. Because when the 410 Legend came out, they did not require you to drill any new holes in the chassis or to adjust where the rack goes or anything like that. They basically set up the way the front gearbox mounts and basically gave you a shorter steering rack so that everything clears without having to extend the nose or to pull the steering rack back. So I'd like to try this to see if it works with the SP2 kit. That way, again, I minimize any hacking that I would have to do to the aluminum chassis. So we'll see how that goes. I'll test fit it. If it doesn't work out, then I'll have to use a different chassis. I'll save that one for a different project. I have another World's Car chassis that I can use to cut up for this build if I absolutely need to. But that's just something to point out and just give you an idea of what the difference is in length here of the arm. So if I just put these holes on top of each other, there is a slight difference in, let me see if I can get this right here, where the ball stud actually mounts. So it's just a little bit further back, right? And if I put it on this arm here, it should be about the same type of offset here. See, you can see the ball stud is not, gets pulled back a little bit. So maybe this is, I don't know if it's the same, but maybe comparable to this offset that I have to use here. So I'll try it and we'll see how it goes. Another thing to point out with the SP, so with the 410 Legend kit, the front gearbox had a differential, but it wasn't a differential in the conventional sense. All it really was two one-way bearings, one-way bearing for each of the left and right sides. So you didn't have a true differential, but for the SP2, it actually has a ball differential inside the front gearbox. So in that respect, it's actually better than the Legend kit. So I think that's kind of interesting. So I'll have to take this apart, clean it up and everything, and put it back together. Another thing is, because I'm using the SP2 front gearbox, I thought it would be appropriate to get the SP1 rear gearbox that was made by MIP. So I found one of these on eBay, and I already took it apart for you just so you can see what it looks like on the inside. It's kind of interesting. All the gears are metal. The diff gear is metal, the idler gear is metal, and the input gear is metal. And the diff out drives actually screw on with a little Allen key there, so or a grub screw. So you mount the gearbox, you put this onto the diff out drive, and you tighten down the grub screw, and that holds this in place. And you do it for both sides. This whole assembly here is a metal gear. So I do wonder, if you were to actually run this, it would probably be high maintenance. You'd have to take it apart quite often and make sure you lubricate all these metal joints. I wonder about the wear in the actual mounting points for the diff balls in here, if they would wear out inside the gear, because that's metal to metal contact as well. So I assume this was probably a high maintenance gearbox. But this is going to be a shelf queen, so it doesn't really matter to me. And I thought it would be cool to, make everything MIP as far as I can do that for the drivetrain. The only caveat to this is that this top shaft presently is not set up to take a slipper clutch. The top shaft is short, so even if I can mount an old RC10 slipper hub on the back here, there's not enough screw space to fit the other side of the slipper clutch and the spring and everything. I'm pretty sure that there was a slipper clutch option that was sold for this gearbox, but they are incredibly hard to find. I thought about using maybe like an RC10 B4 top shaft for the input shaft here, and then mounting a VTS slipper on it, which you can do for the standard stealth gearboxes. But for this, the actual input gear is a different size, so you cannot use the B4 input shaft here. It has to be this assembly as far as I can figure. So that's kind of where it is right now. The first things I plan on doing is, cleaning this up, rebuilding the diff, and then doing the same for the front gearbox. And then after that, I will have to take a nose and drill these holes in here into the, some kind of front nose that I have, because this front gearbox mounts actually with 2 screws on the bottom. On the Legend, the gearbox kind of like just sort of hugged the front shock tower, but here you actually have to screw it to the front nose. So I'll start with those 2 holes, okay, and then I'll mount that to the chassis, and then I'll test fit the shorter 410 Legend steering rack, and I'll see if that works. If it works, then great. If not, then I'll have some more work to do. So in any case, I think that's all I really wanted to go over for the time being. Yeah, so that's it for now, and thanks for watching.